So yesterday we had a look at what the British view of like the Trump lack of leadership and has caused to the contributing factor of the coronavirus spreading so rapidly in the US and literally becoming top of the league table. It won't be long before you see mounting deaths, and we have seen very clearly, especially in Italy, this can kill very quickly, very rapidly. So I wouldn't expect, and this will just sweep across the country in the US. Like I say, at the moment, it's New York and New Orleans are the hotspots at the moment for it, but that will spread across the country. So, and that will lead to deaths. And Trump's response and his lack of leadership to it will be the end of his presidency. And likewise, today we come to the New York Times piece on this. So we're doing sort of the reverse. So this is the America's opinion on our guy. And it's basically, the headline is, this from New York Times, by the way. Boris Johnson is not cut out for this crisis. So Boris Johnson has spent decades preparing for his leading role, honing his adopted character, perfecting his mannerisms, gauging the reactions to his performance and adjusting it for maximum effect. Now, he is the national stage and he is a rapt audience he always craved. His speech this week announcing a lockdown drew the biggest television audience in Britain in a century. The problem is that he has been preparing for the wrong part. The man came to power playing Falstaff, a double-dealing, comically entertaining, shameless rogue. Now he is suddenly on stage as Henry V, and the wartime king, whose solemn judgment, intense focus, charisma, and conviction must lead his nation in a time of crisis. Mr. Johnson doesn't know how to play that part, and it shows. This is not a rehearsal. This, his careless, inexcusable reluctance to track and halt the virus earlier, very well, will have cost lives. Throughout the last weeks, as the coronavirus crisis becomes apparent to everyone in Britain, Mr. Johnson has been indecisive, contradictory, confused and confusing. Jovial when he should be grave, muddled when a frightened nation desperately needs him to be clear, and man-picked for his supposed talent as a great communicator, has stumbled his way through news conferences, occasionally hitting with evident relief upon joy of a riff he finds familiar. In the rare moments when he has struck the right note, he unerringly hits a jarring one minutes later, hours or days later. He switches off strategy and tries his lack of clarity. Left far too many Britons oblivious to the importance of social distancing until far too late. As the virus spread into Europe in mid-February, an alert Prime Minister would have taken immediate charge, turbocharging precautions. We are aware that possible pandemic posed a grave danger to Britain. Instead, he vanished from public view for 12 days, mostly spent on a private holiday with his pregnant fiancée at a palatial country house. It was only at the end of February, with 8,000 known coronavirus cases worldwide and the World Health Organization on the edge of declaring a pandemic, that Mr. Johnson began to wake up. By that time, there were 20 confirmed cases in Britain, and 1 death already, and surely many more are coming. Bear in mind, at the time I'm doing this video, we have passed over 1,000 deaths. I hope it doesn't spread more than that, but we'll have to see. Unfortunately, and Boris is to blame for this. There's no if, and, or buts. He is unanimously to blame. He and the leading Tory party, through not only lack of preparedness for this crisis and being able to see it when it was on the horizon, not preparing enough, but also for decades and for the past decade, underfunding the NHS, so they are now almost literally at crisis point. Luckily, at the moment, we are managing to cope, but the NHS shouldn't be in a crisis of this magnitude because the government, the Tory government, just hasn't funded it. It shouldn't be that way. So on February the 28th, after the FTSE 100 index suffered its biggest one-week fall since 2008, Mr. Johnson finally said the virus was the country's top priority. Only not enough of a priority, it turned out. For him to start work on it that weekend, he could have convened an immediate meeting of the government's top emergency committee, COBRA. But he postponed it to Monday. It's as if the virus was unforeseen and exponential spread would also be taking the weekend off. The next week, Mr. Johnson announced that we should be all basically just go about our normal daily lives. So as long as we washed our hands for 20 seconds several times a day, it was advice he immediately undermined by boasting cheerfully that he was still shaking hands as he had done indeed at a hospital where several virus patients just days before he did not recommend stopping. 2 days later, as Italy and Spain were shutting down, pleading for other countries not to repeat their mistakes, Mr. Johnson was explaining jauntily that one of the options for handling the coronavirus was not to close schools or sporting events, but to take it on the chin, take it all in one go and allow disease, as it were, to move through the population without taking as many draconian measures. The policy, it was later revealed, was to encourage herd immunity. That implied some 40 million people getting ill and another 800,000 ending up in intensive care. As it was apparent to an aghast public that a creaking and underfunded health system with fewer than 5,000 intensive care beds was an acute shortage of ventilators, masks, suits and gloves and inadequate testing capacity, that a disease running free would fall apart just as Italy's had done. Herd immunity was quickly revised. Suddenly restrictions started piling up, but some days only as recommendations. A 14-day isolations, a warning against pubs, restaurants, theatres, a ban on music and mass gatherings, school closings. Every day brought new shocks as the government ran to catch up. Each day it acted as if it were taken by surprise by the virus's spread. Mr. Johnson found it impossible to maintain either consistency or seriousness. He delighted in describing cutting peak death rates as squashing the sombrero, and declared that with some verve that we would soon see the coronavirus packing. He has veered among solemnity, evident boredom, and grins as if it were the virus briefings were the Boris Johnson entertainment show, not the grimmest of necessary of broadcasts. He said that the elderly must be protected from contact, then declared that he hoped to visit his mother. Despite doctors and nurses were warning of immediate disaster, some of his cabinet were in revolt at his failure to grasp the crisis, risk his jolly image, and order Britain closed. On Monday, he finally had to announce that Britain's lockdown had begun. Even then, at the time of profound national fear and disorientation, Mr. Johnson could not speak with gravitas, only with the odd stage infamous of a man pretending while half his mind was elsewhere. His whole political appeal has always rested on his capacity for artful ambiguity, and never necessarily meaning anything he says, for amusing and uplifting people, for avoiding hard facts. It is what he knows, but it's not what we need. He is trapped and he is unsuitable for the role, and we are trapped with him, fearing it will now grow into the part. He will not grow into the part. Britain is going into a battle without the armour a Henry would have found, and we now know how badly this play might end. So there you go. The Conservative fact machine is trying to pose Boris as a hero, but no, Boris failed to act. The Tories have criminally underfunded our NHS to a point where we do not have enough protective equipment for our doctors and frontline nurses. If you have volunteered for the NHS, You are putting your life at risk. You are putting your family's life at risk. Now, if you want to go and volunteer, do that. But do know that you probably will have to provide your own protective equipment. And that is an absolute must, not only for protection of your own life, but what if you come home and you have a family? You're putting their lives at risk. This is serious, and Boris and the Tories are not good governors. They are completely short-term thinkers for short, quick, easy wins. And this coronavirus, from the very start, was going to be a long-term thing. And because the Tories are not down with long-term planning or long-term thinking, they couldn't react to it. The Tories should never be allowed into government again. And this isn't the first time I've said this on this channel. They are completely unfit to govern. We are only have them because of our first past the post archaic system, which is one reason why it needs to go.